Hi, guys. This is Andrea Epting with Resolve Strategies Inc. And I am here today with Kelly. She's so wonderful. And she is the one who really goes in and organizes and reads and comments and does a lot behind the scenes with regards to your discussion and your questions and all of that. So she is really involved, and please support all of her work by going and viewing and commenting and being part of the discussion, because we're here to help. We do this free of charge. We want to bring professional insight into the community free of charge. We're all about that. So let's get going. This month we're talking about mood and food, and today on Free Talk Friday we are going to be talking about the arousal cycle in particular, and dysregulation, which means emotional dysregulation. And so Kelly's brought us some great questions that y'all have posed, and we're going to do our best to answer it. So thank you. Kelly, what you got for today?
So one we got a bunch of times was even what is the arousal cycle?
Okay, so a lot of people, there's obviously some confusion around this, and why would we bring it up for disordered eating or specific eating disorders? And the arousal cycle is a very real thing, and it is something that's typically talked about when we talk about sex. But arousal cycle happens all the time inside our bodies, internally, and it has to do with the beginning, the middle, and the end of this very vicious cycle that takes place when our central nervous systems and our brains have been hijacked by disordered eating or any kind of behavioral or chemical addiction. Because everything, whether it's behavioral or chemical, it has to do with our brain, and it has to do with brain chemistry and what's going on neurobiologically in connection with the body and the brain. And so it has a lot to do with triggers, and when we're triggered we become dysregulated. And for people struggling with a negative relationship to food, it could be as progressed as an eating disorder, but at that point they are experiencing an arousal cycle on a regular basis and are becoming emotionally and physiologically dysregulated and feeling kind of out of control around this. So hopefully that helps you understand why we would even talk about an arousal cycle in conjunction with mood and food, because the arousal cycle affects your mood, and then it affects your behaviors. So what is the arousal cycle? Typically it's going to start with the stimuli, and then you're going to become very excited around that stimuli, and so your central nervous system is going to begin to react, and that is your breath changes, your heart rate changes, your emotions start to come up. It usually triggers some really negative or unwanted thoughts and feelings. And then the excitement leads to plateau or orgasm if you were talking about it sexually. But here we're just talking about the unwanted behavior that comes out of a need to cope with and soothe the dysregulation. And then it goes into resolution. But unfortunately, resolution in this case scenario just means it brings up a lot of shame, self-loathing, and self-hate, and more destructive patterns of behavior in some cases. So you can start to see that cycle of arousal. And as we've talked about in other segments, there is a shame core. And so when the shame core is triggered and you act out in a behavior as a means to cope with it, then it just brings about more shame. So you can see how that cycle just is never ending until you make those wise decisions that only come from this frontal lobe that's already disengaged. So we're trying to re-engage this frontal lobe so that you can start to make wiser decisions and exit this pattern. I hope that helps.
So the next question was how does food relate to all of that? But I think we kind of touched on that, and the follow-up to it was, is it just enjoying good food?
No, but food in this case scenario, when you're talking about arousal cycle, food would be the stimuli. But it's not just food in front of your face. It's not just being confronted with food itself. It could be obviously smells. It could be memories. can be negative emotions. It can be the time of year. It could be being in the kitchen. It can be being around certain people. So we really go back to people, places, things, and negative stimuli that you have at any point in life associated with food or trying to avoid reality with food. So it could be a certain person that maybe brought up feelings of comparisons or shame or self-hate, and just the thought of engaging with that person could start this whole cycle. So they might be the stimuli. But when it comes to arousal cycle and eating disorders, we really are talking about thoughts, feelings, emotions that arise when confronted with the thought of food or actually physically encountering food. So it might be mealtime, might not.
So how does all this become dysregulated when it comes to food and the arousal cycle?
Yeah. So dysregulation is the early part of the arousal cycle. You become dysregulated mentally and emotionally and physiologically when you are confronted with any of that unwanted or negative or just unwanted stimuli, because I won't say it's negative stimuli if it's food. I mean, we absolutely have to live and breathe and drink and eat as a way to nourish our bodies, our minds, our souls, to be productive, to be healthy. So we know that in reality, food isn't an unwanted stimuli, but if you're progressed in an eating disorder, sometimes it does. And that's at the point when you start to become dysregulated. And then the behavior, whether you're restricting or you're overeating, either way, the behavior that comes out of that dysregulation is the disordered eating part. That's the behavior that comes out before you can get to, unfortunately, that dark place that comes after an unwanted behavior, when you're feeling out of control, when you're feeling like, oh my gosh, here I have lied to myself again. I said I wasn't going to do this anymore. Or if it's more progressed and your mind and neurobiologically you become so dependent on it that you're actually now really looking forward to the self-loathing. I mean, at least your brain is addicted on the victimization and the self-loathing and all of the stuff that comes in the resolution phase. So you can start to see that pattern, that negative cycle and that pattern of behavior. I hope that helps you understand why we would talk about polyvagal theory and the arousal cycle and dysregulation when you talk about mood disorders and food disorders. We later in this series are going to talk about what are mood disorders associated with eating disorders. But oftentimes when you become dysregulated early on, if you are acting out in eating disordered behavior, it is a way to try to manage or cope with anxiety, depression, feelings of worthlessness and less than. So pay attention to those things and pay attention to how your body, embodied, how you respond to those unwanted stimuli, if it's people, places, and things, and what negative thoughts come out of it that reinforce the need to act out in those unwanted behaviors that have become destructive in your life. So I hope that you have learned a little bit today, and keep tuning in, www.resolvestrategiesinc.com. Thank you, and keep writing in.